Thank you, everybody, for joining us in this first webinar for the Uppsala Antibiotic Center in this 2026 year, 6th of February, round number, 6th of February 2026. And as you might have heard or seen around, we are opening up our center to join even more members around Uppsala and Uppsala University. And one of the recent initiatives is the UAC research community that is aiming to engage more senior researchers in the area of antibiotics and resistance that have not yet been part of the center officially. And one of these new members at the Antibiotic Center, although is an old friend from the very beginning, is Professor Enrico Baraldi, who today is going to present his area of knowledge and work and some of the recent work that they've been doing in his group. And Professor Enrico Baraldi recently moved from Tecna to HUMSAM at the university, a bit of a change from technical and natural sciences to the humanities and social sciences, where he's now holding a position of chair of marketing. And we will see that marketing, it might sound a bit of advertising, but it also is very important in the topic of antibiotics and antibiotic resistance. So with that, brief introduction of you, Enrico. Thank you so much for presenting your work today at this USC webinar. A bit of housekeeping. The webinar is being recorded, so if you are not okay with your voice or likeness to be on recording, you can write your questions in the chat, questions that we can relay to Enrico at the end of his presentation during the Q&A. But other than that, if you actually want to bring up your mic up or your camera so it becomes a bit more of a lively discussion, feel free to do so by raising your hand, and then we will let you into the conversation when the time is there. So thank you so much again. Thank you, everybody, for your attention. And Enrico, looking forward to your presentation.
Great. Can you hear me?
Yes, go.
Perfect. So let's get ahead with the topic for today. And I would like to share you some basic ideas on my research in the latest, let's say, 12 years or so, when I've been looking at the market for antibiotics and the problem that afflicts it in terms of lack of innovation. And I will try to highlight the causes, but also potential solutions. All of you, of course, know about the wicked problem of antimicrobial resistance, but I will try to share you how this can be broken down into at least two major problems, one which has to do with innovation and one which has to do with access. We will keep the stewardship aspect a little bit on the sideline today. But then I will try to show you some theoretical way to approach the problem. Where does the roots of the problem rely? And there is something that we developed together actually with the Swedish government for the European presidency by Sweden. A couple of years ago, we called it the golden chain of value creation around antibiotics, and I will share it with you. Then we will talk about the two major issues. We lack new antibiotics, and we will try to see at policies that can address this type of problem to stimulate R&D. That's the first type of failure, the innovation failure. Then we'll look at the lack of access of old antibiotics too, and including shortages, and we will try to look at potential policies to address that problem. Also sharing my experience with a policy and stakeholder collaboration related initiative called Platinea. And then we will see if there are any simple answer or not to the issue. Okay, moving to the wicked problem. I'm not spending too much time on it. You all know about that we're facing a major problem. Not only now, of course, it's already 1 million deaths directly from AMR, 5 indirectly or related, but in the future it could become 10 times worse. And you know all about the problem that afflicts the economics around antibiotic. Basically, that when you use an antibiotic, of course, its effectiveness, efficacy will decrease, and then you cannot use it as much, or you will burn basically this important resource, right? So we need badly new antibiotics, but we have to be conservative with its use, which reduces, of course, the profit for the developers and the marketers, and therefore the efforts to innovate are becoming insufficient. Okay, how can we solve this paradox and make antibiotics sustainable also from an economic and not only ecological point of view? There are a lot of causes behind this problem, as you can imagine, scientific, technical, social, economical. But there is at the same time also a lot of confusion about which is the major cause and what could be the solutions, even including conflicts between stakeholders. And I'm not going to solve, of course, these conflicts with an analysis. It's impossible. This has to be dealt with discussions out in the real world. And that's, of course, a complex aspect in itself. I will look at basically at the causes, not giving you a ranking of them and potential solutions. And then the stakeholders will, of course, need to do the job there. But let's move from the innovation problem to the market problem. I told you also that there is a lack of access of old antibiotics, and it's shocking and depressing that still today almost 1 million children die in low-income countries because they can't have access to extremely cheap antibiotics, okay? Or sepsis. Is in itself, irrespective if it's related to resistant or not, causing almost 10 million deaths per year. If you look at shortages, they can be also expensive, that tremendously expensive. If you look at the economic point of view, in high income countries, if up to $20 million per shortage. What is the problem here? Well, if you look at the total market size for all antibiotics sold all over the world, including new and old antibiotics, it's only a bit more than $50 billion. Do you know how much a blockbuster from the area of cancer treatment or weight control takes in? Well, it's over 20 billion per product. Okay, and we're talking about hundreds of antibiotics. Antibiotics represent only 3% of the total antibiotic market. Okay, and the basic reason is that they are paid too little compared to Keytruda or Ozempic. Think about the huge value they instead bring to society. They are life-saving, they are the cornerstone for a lot of other procedures, and yet we do not pay enough for them. So this is another big market failure that is associated with lack of access and a lot of shortages. I already told you that the issue of AMR revolves around these three key concepts represented by the tripod, for instance, and it's a matter of access and innovation that needs to be, let's say, put together with the problem or the importance of sustainable use. But there are different values that are associated with these three concepts. When it comes to innovating, it's of course to create new antibiotics, and the value of them is the ability to treat new infections, new type of bacteria, or bacteria that have become resistant. Okay? Access is nonetheless an equally important value because it's about bringing, distributing the right antibiotic to the right patient in the right moment. So you need to have both of them. And then, of course, sustainable use is about preserving this value for future generations. Okay? And yet we are missing the importance even of the economic value of antibiotics. The value of antibiotics is created through a lot of activities, and that's the golden chain model that I told you about that we developed for the Swedish presidency, the EU high-level meeting in 2003. And you can see all of these activities going actually, if you start from the red one, surveillance, realizing where there are the threats, the future threats in terms of pathogens, then prioritizing these needs, and then ideally there should be some activity of discovery that tries to match those needs. It's not always that way, but anyways, then you move to preclinical development, clinical, and hopefully you get antibiotic approved, but then comes the next problem. Where are you going to sell it if you are a developer that is enough lucky to have gotten antibiotic approved? Well, you usually do not go and sell it all over the world. You select it country by country where you can make the most of the money. And then here already you create a problem of access. Then you need to produce the product along complex supply chains. And then you need someone who will procure the product. And not all countries have the possibility to pay for it, but even rich countries sometimes try to push down the prices. And definitely they do so when an antibiotic has gone generic. Okay, so we need to connect all together these links in the chain. And unfortunately, and I'm not going through all the details here, it's very clear there are many barriers at each link of the chain that can destroy the value of antibiotics or do not allow to actually create value around antibiotics. I will share this presentation afterwards so you can look at each of these barriers. I will pick us up some of them as we move along. But when you have identified the barriers to value creation, then you can come up with suggestions, and this will be the blue, light blue boxes here to try to address those barriers. Okay, I will now delve a little bit more concretely into some of these barriers and some of these solutions. But as I said, I will share this slide. So any one of you interested in some more specific link of the chain, barriers and incentive, or let's call it solutions, policies in many ways, you can have a complete look at this. But let's delve more specifically into the barriers to innovation. Probably you've seen this picture. It's a bit outdated, but still, unfortunately, it's current. 10 years later, we still have an innovation gap in the sense that the antibiotics that were discovered back, the last discovery was in the 80s. If you look at the second, the lower picture here, lipopeptides, cubicin, daptomycin. But then it took 10, 20 years more to introduce it. The big problem is that we have not invented any really new antibiotics since then. So for the future, it looks pretty depressing if you consider the time it takes from a discovery to introducing a new antibiotic. And yet we have no trace of this completely new, really new antibiotics that would be needed to address the most advanced, the most dangerous pathogens. But why is it so? Well, there are a lot of barriers, and the picture I showed you before included all of them across the innovation value chain. But here I will try to pick up some of them. You probably heard that the easiest discoveries have already been made. The low-hanging fruits have already been picked up. So there are clear scientific barriers here. Then you need to make a discovery and also bring an antibiotic all the way through the clinical pathways to market. You need to have a lot of complementary competencies, and they do not exist in small teams originating from academia and not even in small SMEs. Okay. The problem is that with the lack of interest from also larger developers in antibiotics, all of this competence has been disappearing, right? And you cannot recreate it in academia alone, for instance. Then, as I already highlighted or hinted at previously, it takes a hell of a lot of time to go from discovery to launching a product. We're talking about at least 15 years. And this is also extremely expensive, up to someone would say $1 billion, well, at least $500 million to develop a new antibiotics. And that, of course, affects negatively the profitability. And then comes the problem. If you even succeed to bring a new antibiotic to market, you will have to use it very sparingly, which reduces the market size of the product. Okay? The market will be very uncertain and definitely small. We made some analysis with the Global AMR Hub about 5 years ago to try and see and forecast the market potential for any new future antibiotics. For instance, the first one, the dark blue one, should have been an antibiotic against bloodstream infections. And you can see what is called peak year sales, which is the moment when sales reach the maximum, about 11 years after market launch. They would be around $180 million. You might think, oh, that's pretty much money. No, it's nothing. A large company wants to have peak year sales of at least 1 billion to consider a product attractive, right? And here you see 108 million. We are 5 times lower than what they would expect. The other antibiotic we looked at and modeled, looking at their sales potential, was a product for pneumonia, and it would be even lower, around 120 million in peak year sales. So you understand that it's not an attractive type of product, okay? And it becomes basically, yeah, totally insufficient in terms of profitability. Big companies, they also have other products like Ozempic or Keytruda, and then it's not attractive, of course, to compare a product that in peak year sales has a maximum of 180 with a product that peak year sales has 30 billion. You understand? It's like a universe of difference. That's why most big pharma left the field, and SMEs that are still left are not enough, right? There is not enough money for them. And the big problem is that companies, when they go about and developing products, they make decisions at every step in the development pipeline. And they ask questions, shall we keep going on or shall we withdraw? Unfortunately, given those very unattractive type of economic outlook, they would sooner or later decide to withdraw. What we need is to bring money to them, basically, or some kind of support at the various steps that we have along the development pathway here. And let's have a look at these ways to bring money to them or support. First way is to give grants, which are paid to developers, irrespective of their success. It's called a push incentive. That's another way, conceptually, to call it. And of course, it would reduce the cost for them. So hopefully bringing them to a go decision instead of a withdraw decision. Another alternative is something that we call a pipeline coordinator. There are a few of them around, probably you're familiar with them, Carbex in the US, GuardP, which is a global player, operating also for products attractive for low and middle income countries, or Enable, which is a new version still present in Uppsala University. It's about supporting every single project with both money, but also especially competence, help to them to go over the critical, let's call moment in early developments, I would say, rather than late development. Then another interesting way to bring money and support to projects would be through something called milestone prices. At the completion, successful completion of some of the phases, like phase 1 or phase 2, and then you would bring to them something attractive, like a big pot of money, maybe 40 to $100 million. I can illustrate a little bit how this would work. Think about 6, 7, 8 projects starting preclinical, the dark arrows here. If you tell them, if you succeed and bring good result at the end of phase 1, the best product or the first one will get, let's say, 40 million. Then you can imagine that a lot of projects will start, maybe only 3 will complete it, and only maybe 1 will get the award, but at least given failure rate, you would have 3 that continue, and also the 2 yellow one not awarded would contribute to fill the pipeline. Okay, so that's a mechanism to attract them. You could also provide type of incentives, monetary incentives, instead at the very end of the clinical pipeline, basically when a product is approved. And that's something that we call a market entry reward. However, this reward needs to be much bigger. If you pay it in a lump sum, you need to give or take around $2 billion. It's called the pool to market at the end of the process, okay? And if you want to illustrate it along the same pipeline, you bring it at the very end. Some companies actually tell you that they would do it only if they get $4 billion. So we're talking about pretty high amount of money. Okay. Another variant is called revenue guarantees. Instead of giving a one-time lump sum payment, you spread it over 10 years and you give a little bit smaller payments, around $300 million per year, basically covering, sorry to be jumping up and forth in the presentation, basically covering those very poor profitability or sales that you would have here. Instead of waiting for peak year sales, and as I told you, it will never get over 180 million, you will need to give about 300 million per year to make the antibiotic profitable and attractive. Okay, this is the idea of a revenue guarantee. However, you can't give it to any new antibiotic developed because some antibiotics will not be so good, so innovative. So you need to be very selective and only go for the most needed antibiotics, given priority defined by public health agency or the WHO. And now we're going back, sorry to do this back and forth, to really the golden chain of value creation around antibiotics. This should be based on the public health needs and prioritization to kick up and make the whole chain of antibiotics development, creation, and access sustainable also economically. Sorry to make again a big jump in the presentation. But if you look at these various support tools, they would enter at different levels of the development pipeline. Grants, you can basically pay them at every step, but in our analysis, we propose to pay them maximum at the end of phase 2, even though we know that in some situations they've been paid even for phase 3, but that would be a bit too late. Pipeline coordinators working on collaboration and non-profit development could operate in any step of the development pipeline, whereas milestone prizes, as I told you, they would act at the early stages. And then we have the market entry rewards that would intervene and be paid only to products reaching the end and being approved, which means being successful at the end of the whole development pipeline. Okay, so this was the basic ideas to address the problem of lack of innovation, the innovation failure. But we also have a problem related to a market failure in terms of access, which means that either products are not registered in a country that will need them, and I'm referring especially to low and medium income countries, but also it could be European countries. A lot of last generation new antibiotics are not registered in Romania, Bulgaria, which are countries in Europe, and they definitely need them, okay? Or another problem market failure is about shortages, which can be stockouts lasting from 3 months up to 2 years. And of course, this is a big problem, like for patients, if it's an antibiotic without alternatives. If there are alternatives, it's a minor problem, still a problem, I would say, but it's minor problem. Then we have also withdrawals, and that's a permanent shortage if you think about it. So summing up, this type of lack of access, they can afflict both high-income countries. For instance, there have been shortages, Piptazo, 2 years. Withdrawals, they can afflict also high-income markets. Ceftibuten, for instance, was withdrawn in the whole of Europe, and still it's a product important for doctors. And then we have lack of registration, which is most a problem for low and middle-income countries. Why? What are the reasons? Well, you would see them detailed if you go back to the golden chain of antibiotic value creation, but here I would like to focus on some of them. I can tell you there are many causes, but all of them revolve around the key problem of low and declining profitability around the antibiotics, especially when they go generics. Okay? If we focus even more on Sweden, which is the country I've been studying the most, then there is a further issue. Sweden wants to have many different narrow spectrum antibiotics, and especially they want to have very special formulation, for instance, pediatric formulation. So the needs of medical doctors in Sweden are very specific, and there are very many small markets. It's difficult to keep all of them on the market. Then we have problems with the global value chains that are easily disrupted because they're very long. And there is a risk of monopoly situation when there are very few suppliers of key ingredients, active substance, APIs, active pharmaceutical ingredients. They are very geographically concentrated just in some areas. So you can think about the geopolitical problems that we're facing. So there are complex reasons. With Platinea, which is a platform that I will tell you in a moment, we made a sophisticated analysis of all of these causes. There are more than 60 causes. Now we have a paper published on the journal Antibiotics if you want to have more details. Of course, I'm not going through all of them, but we grouped them into 6 big blocks. The causes of shortages and or deregistrations or long-term shortages. These causes can have to do with the structure of the supply market, as I told you, concentration in very few API suppliers located only in some countries. But there are problems also with how we buy, the customers, the purchasing, the constant chase by public procurement to kill cost, buying only the cheapest product based on price. That creates problem. And that also in terms create problems for the profitability of suppliers, the market authorization holders. They are facing narrower and narrower market niches, a lot of competition, and they're buying more and more expensive APIs from a few restricted sources. If you look at manufacturing and production, we also have problems there. Rigid manufacturing processes which require high order quantities, whereas some small markets need very small quantities. And then it creates also a lot of destruction of products that become obsolete in the shelves of distributors, for instance. Or it's difficult to shift production from obsolete factories to more modern factories. It's very difficult to shift the dossiers, for instance, because it's old products approved maybe in the 50s or the 60s, and it's difficult to make a new production in a new, better factory. Okay? Patterns of use of antibiotics, of course, we know that we have to be restricted, and we know that doctors want to use the right antibiotics on the right patient, which further restricts the market size. For instance, children formulation, they're very specific, and there are not many suppliers willing to produce those small amounts. And finally, the last block here, it's about the practices and the norms in the field. It's a field, antibiotic and pharmaceutical, characterized by limited collaboration, secrecy, not much information exchange. So that becomes difficult if you want to solve problems that afflict the whole system. Let's move to what could be a potential way to address the problems related to shortages. And that's a project I've been working on. It's almost 10 years. We will celebrate our anniversary next year. Platinea stands for the platform to innovate around existing antibiotics. It has both a use optimization, stewardship approach, and a access approach. Now I will focus mostly on the access approach. We've been funded by Platinea over 2 rounds. And what we want to do is really to preserve the value of antibiotics for the future generation by improving access and precision in the use. We are 22, actually 23 nowadays partner from industry, academia, and public authorities, and also healthcare. You have their logotypes here. If we group them, you can see that we're about 6, 7 academic partners. One public authority, the Public Health Agency of Sweden, but we have also close collaboration with the Medical Product Agency of Sweden and the Reimbursement Agency. We have the Pharmacist Association, then we have several healthcare providers, Akademiska, Skåne, Karolinska, the Strama, of course, you all know who they are, and also northern region of Västerbotten. And then we have several industry players, a big generic actor, Viatris, but also regional manufacturers. We have Recipharm, which has newly become APL, the national producer of extempore formulations, but nowadays they also run the factory in Strängnäs, which used to be Recipharm. So the Swedish public arm owns a known antibiotic factory. It's a big important step that has an impact on supply chains, but it's very early to call the results for it. But Platinea, these actors, these 30 plus people representing a particular work package working on access, we have been gathering and discussing for over 3 years to define policy solutions to address all of those causes in order to reduce the risk of shortages. And we came up with a list of 10 prioritized solutions. Once again, if you're curious in the process of how we got there, I can recommend this article on antibiotics, who came out in the last of 2025, in the end of 2025. So the first easy solution would be to increase the security stocks on supply chains. Second solution would be to coordinate better the 21 Swedish regions. Then we would need also a good IT system to overview the stock levels, the needs. Of course, with the AI, you can do a lot of stuff nowadays. We will need to be better in terms of purchase procedures, looking not only at price, but also at rewarding precision and sustainability. Interestingly, this used to be called the Norwegian model because that's a model that was commonplace in Norway, but hopefully it will come to Sweden as well. We would need in Sweden also tendering that do not only pick the cheapest, but that always bring in a parallel supplier at least. Then we would definitely need to increase the prices for some antibiotics that have now very, very low prices. And they have so few suppliers, market authorization holders, that all of them are about to leave the market. So there will be deregistration and no more products available. Then another solution, also for old antibiotics, is similar to what we call the revenue guarantee for new antibiotics. This will be much lower amounts, of course. We're talking about maybe less than 1 million kronors, not hundreds of millions of dollars on the global scale. This is for Sweden, but it will be a yearly payment, irrespective of sales, just to keep the product on the market. Then there are more regulatory suggestions that deal with simplifying the registration in Sweden of old antibiotics that are used, for instance, in Norway or the Netherlands or Belgium. Temoxilin is one of these, for instance, but surprisingly not registered in Sweden. Or we should also look at products whose MAH, the market authorization holder, is planning a DE registration, and go to them, please don't, or let's try to find another market authorization holder for this product before you deregister it. Because it's very difficult to re-register a product that has been deregistered or withdrawn. Last but not least, we think that the Nordic country could and should collaborate more with joint purchasing or organizing so that production that is still made in Scandinavia or Nordic can still be done here to satisfy together the five Nordic markets. Okay, so these are the ideas. And as you think about it, once again, it's about bringing more money onto the supply chain of antibiotics. Basically, all steps from API through formulation, production, sales of specific markets, distribution, and all the way the products are used in pharmacies and hospitals. So just to tell you once again, these solutions should help to reduce the risk of shortages and withdrawals from market. And those ideas that I told you, for instance, if you look at higher prices, of course, you would have more money paid by the government because in Sweden you have a public system, but this money would go to the market authorization holders that would have a better profitability and decide not to withdraw a product, hopefully. Security stocks, for instance, at the level of national wholesalers, they would reduce the risk of shortages because of unexpected fluctuation in demand and supply. A fixed yearly payment to market authorization holders should induce them to avoid deregistering. Paying for delivery precision would require them also to keep better supply chain management procedures. Okay, so that's the idea. But to get it, put it in the way you want, but you need to bring more money on the supply chains. Okay, so maybe you're already guessing the simple answer, and it's in common both to stimulate innovation and also solve the market failure of shortages and deregistration. It's first of all to recognize that antibiotics are extremely valuable drugs. Sorry to say that, but probably even more valued than Ozempic, right? Maybe you should take away it from the recording, sorry, but keep it. So the simple answer, unfortunately, it's about bringing more money. It seems like a brutally simple solution, but I don't want you to misunderstand me. There is a complex reasoning here that maybe we can't make it now. But if you just throw more money to the existing system, exactly into the supply chains as they look now, exactly the developing or lack of developing networks that we have nowadays, unfortunately, the money will probably go to the wrong place, to the companies that already have money, and then maybe we don't solve the problem. So you have to be very careful. You need to try also at the same time to change that system, those supply chains, these deep networks. So, for instance, you need to give more money to the pipeline coordinators that would require also behavioral changes by the developers in the network connected to them. That would imply also to have more collaboration around the SMEs and funding those collaborations. Okay. Looking at more the problem of supply chains, either you reinforce the relationships in those chains or you use parallel chains. It's not enough just to give more money to the market authorization holders and hope that they will make their chains better. You have to require them to improve the relationship of those chains or to use parallel chains. Okay. And I believe that more money will need to go also to stimulate more collaboration between the sectors, the public authorities, the industry, the healthcare, and also academia. So we need more money also to fund this. That's the basic idea. And with this, I would like to thank you for listening to me, and I'm all ears for questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Enrico. Thank you for a very clear exposition of a very complex issue that has a lot of, as you were showing, chains and steps and and different actors involved in it. We will open now the time for discussion and questions. As I said, you are free to open up your hand or open up your mic and talk to Enrico and to us about it. Or you can write it in the chat. Someone is telling you in the chat, thank you very much. And I think probably some people maybe went. We are some remaining here, and maybe I can kick start. Oh, Grigory. Grigory has the hand up. Yes, Grigory, go ahead.
Thank you very much for the presentation. The question I have is about, can you illustrate what you were describing with the go, no goes experiments or information that exists, and just illustrate with like examples?
Yeah, well, I happen to have some extra slides. I don't know if you can still see my slides.
Yes, we can.
It's a little bit of a sophisticated analysis that companies do. Sorry, I don't want to scare anyone, but when these decisions are made by companies, they apply an algorithm or a formula called the expected net present value. This formula tries to forecast the future revenues and cost of a project every year from the next year until the market launch and also the future sales. So the C component will be revenues minus cost. Just that in the beginning, it will be very negative because you have a lot of cost. Then you discount these future revenues according to a discount rate, which is basically indicative of the profitability requirement of the company. This could be up to 20% if it's a company which has many alternatives to invest their money. But then you have to consider also the risk of failure of the product. And in the beginning, this is like R over R. It's the probability of success, I should say, not the risk of failure, which is the revert, right? So you have to consider that at every stage, you're not sure if you will continue. In the beginning, until phase 3, you have some risk of failing. I can also show you the input we had in our analysis, the simulations we made, but that would reduce the potential, especially of future revenues. So that 180 million of forecasted peak year sales is not sure at all. I would say it's only about a 10% possibility to get it in 15 years, or no, sorry, in 25 years. So actually, the discounted value of those 180 million is much smaller. I don't know. I guess it's less than 15 million. Instead, the cost for a phase 1 or phase 2, depending on when you make this analysis, it's quite sure. It's, let's say, certain if you're about to start it, and it's 20 million. I can show you the parameters we used in our simulation here. So for preclinical, it could be a cost up to $34 million. For phase 1, it could be up to 38 million. For phase 2, 76 million. And these costs are pretty sure if you are at the end of preclinical and you're about to start phase 1, you're quite sure that you will have to pay between 2 million if you make a very unambitious, cheap phase 1, up to 30 million if you want to make a strong phase 1. Or it depends on, of course, your skills. It's a lot of factors that affect the size here. So that's why there are so big variations. So when you input and calculate all of this, you can go and check the average expected net present value at different moments, and it's typically very negative. And no company would accept to start a preclinical project if they know already, oh, you're going to lose on average 11 million, and if you're unlucky, it's a 7 million loss. Don't do it. Only when a company comes at the start of phase 3, they would have a relatively good profitability. But they've already gotten rid of all the cost and all the risk of failures. Sorry, am I being too technical, Grigory? Okay, so that's hopefully addresses your question, or
It didn't address my question at all, but it was very interesting. My question were more on the experiments that people can design to validate or invalidate, like going from one stage to the other. But the presentation what you made was really interesting as well. Thank you.
yeah, you're more like onto the how do we call it? The
It,
biological and microbiological.
Yes, I was more
Exp-
thinking like whenever you do a translation, like when you know like you just finished animal studies and you're gonna go into preclinical and like have more insights onto what kind of elements made you decide that oh this experiment was good enough or not, or the conclusion was good enough at this stage and that you go from one stage to the other.
Yeah, that's beyond my area of competence. But at Uppsala University, there are extremely competent people. Anders Carlén, Darmaid, I think, is on the call, right? Have you seen Darmaid?
Yeah, he's here, but we don't know if we want to put him on the spot. If he wants to share, I don't know where he's at, or
Yeah,
maybe he's on
yeah.
the move
Sorry, I shouldn't
watching.
have
But
used the
Darmet
name of
is
a
there. Yes.
person. Yeah, but within Enable 2, there are very specified criteria to define success, or more or less so, from an assay to proceed to the next. So even within the preclinical stage, you can break it down into very many sub stages. The analysis which is usually made. Um, is at the transition from classical macro phases, but of course you have smaller steps inside each of them.
Uh,
Yeah.
Darmet is
Maybe I
here.
can just, Eva, sorry, I
Yes.
can just basically confirm what Enrico is saying. So at the preclinical stage, we have a great many go, no go decision points. Within industry, they typically evaluate preclinical projects every 3 months and decide whether or not to continue for another 3 months. Because we're supporting academics, we're a little more generous every 6 months, but we have strict requirements for toxicity values, which are acceptable or unacceptable, solubility values, chemical and metabolic stability values, off-target interference values, all of this on top of, what I think we would be thinking of the basic microbiological activity. And we're continuously thinking about something. I'm not sure if Enrico mentioned it because I came in a little bit late. A thing called TPP, Target Product Profile. What are you actually going to use this drug for if you are successful? And that's certainly something that will go into the net present value calculation, because if it's for a very narrow use, then the market is very small. So unless you can charge an absolute fortune for it, you will never make money. And, of course, if it has a broad applicability, respiratory tract infections, urinary tract infections, then the market is so much bigger. Anyway, that's basically it.
Thank you.
Great. Anybody here? Anna G is writing on the chat. Do you see any differences, trends regarding antibiotics for animals?
Good question. Unfortunately, we didn't extend our analysis to antibiotics for animals. However, I believe the active substance shouldn't be so different. Maybe it's more a matter of formulation yet are we talking about pets or large scale use in meat production? I mean,
Well, in that case, it would differ a lot depending on the country, right? Because in Sweden, antibiotics are only used to treat animals, right? So then,
exactly. There are studies on the market failure on the animal side, of course, and that's a failure of overuse, I would say. So, unfortunately, we have really that problem because we are the problem resistance because we are overusing on that side. But I have no details on the economic side. Sadly, it's probably valuable and profitable. That's why it is flourishing.
That makes sense. Yes.
Use. Yeah.
I do have a question, Enrico, because maybe you have now perhaps a little bit more of insight. Amar first, perhaps. Yes, Amar, can you tell us your question?
Oh, thank you. I was wondering whether other like more experimental alternatives to antibiotics also have the same economic problems like phage therapy or proteins. Do they also face this like peak of 100 millions where they cannot move like to higher profitability levels as antibiotics?
I can try to answer. We didn't make the analysis on phages and other alternatives. Yet we heard that it's very difficult from a regulatory point of view when it comes to phages, in the sense that there are no specific guidelines. It's probably also difficult to forecast the revenues. So as soon as one would provide the input, then we could make those analyses. And then it would be different companies probably working on them with different profitability requirements. But unfortunately, I'm not aware of it. On the other hand, I know there have been studies on vaccines as preventative measures. And an old study by the ERG group, where Kevin Alderson was involved, could demonstrate that vaccines are also a very good option from a public health viewpoint because, yeah, they would reduce the burden of diseases without the corresponding need to develop antibiotics on particular pathogens.
What about in the market space for vaccines? Would it be more profitable to make vaccines for potential companies and actors?
Absolutely, yeah. And because with the vaccine, we do not have the innovation failure and the market failure, meaning that the more you sell, the less efficient or effective it becomes. And actually, when we did the global AMR study on the peak year sales, the market potential for antibiotics, we had these discouraging figures, which had to do with the constrained use to stewardship and stuff. But we also did a study on diagnostics. And diagnostics doesn't suffer from a market failure. So diagnostics tools, you can sell as much as you want of them. The more you sell, the better it is, no negative effect. And if I recall correctly, the peak year sales was about 4 times the one for antibiotics. Do you realize it? Because the machine would also tell you when you should not use a certain antibiotic, and you would use it to test for multiple antibiotics, panels of antibiotics. So the market size was much better.
Understand.
And the economics.
We have about 5 minutes left. And I don't know if it's enough time to discuss this, but I think it might be relevant that I mean, your presentation and as you started and ended, if we put more money, and specifically if we put the money in the places where it's specifically needed and can be helpful, is the solution that would, help us go somewhere. Then my question is, where is that money coming from? Right? Like, what are the thoughts around where that money should come from? And you were mentioning, Sweden is a place where there's public health system, so the governments are putting money. But if we look at it at a bigger scale globally, what are the thoughts there? Where should the money be coming from?
That's a very difficult question, especially in the current geopolitical situation where countries are now focusing so much more investment on military expenditures. Yet, I believe that in the big concept of preparedness, We can include also the fight against a future emergency, which, of course, the silent pandemic of AMR will be. At the end of the day, I think money should come from this future preparedness budget. Think about yeah, and I'm not saying WHO because they don't have any money. It's impossible. They don't have it. Yet, GARD-P, which is connected to WHO, has been successful in collecting relatively okay funds from governments. It's governments. It could be philanthropic. Wellcome Trust, the Gates Foundation. Some money can come from there. Otherwise, it's yeah, the usual suspects. EU in the preparedness budget, single states probably as part of it, but then they would like definitely to have something more fitting their needs in terms of pathogens. I think the public money is really, really needed here. And maybe this can eventually also bring in more private investment. The idea with the Drive AB project, where I started my adventure in the antibiotic and AMR area, was that any public investment should also be something to bring back private investment. Really, again, it's not about companies just waiting to get money and just cashing in. It's about making changes in the networks and the relationships so that they also need to invest and see the value of antibiotics also for their other therapeutics. There was a model that was very interesting, but unfortunately it was put on the sideline. It's called pay to play, basically requiring that every pharma, if they want to sell their Keytruda, their whatever surgical tools, they have to pay a fee to the antibiotic, let's call it fund, because without antibiotics, they would not be able to sell chemotherapeutic drugs or surgical tools or whatever.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept. I think. I mean, we were thinking about, a pharma company that makes a cancer drug that makes a lot of money, and the cancer patients are also in need of antibiotics. So can some justification of moving the money around like that would make sense and would be, something the companies would agree to do?
Oh, they didn't. Definitely
No.
not. But it's maybe possible to bring it back. Of course, it's a matter of creating academic policy groups that work on it. I would love to do it, but I haven't seen many other people that want to so far.
Mm. All right. We are now at 2 o'clock. This was very interesting and new ideas and where things are coming through. Darmet is showing up as well. So thank you so much, Enrico, for sharing. We hope to see a lot more you at the USC as well. Hopefully UAD, Uppsala Antibiotic Days, and some other occasions. With that, we conclude the webinar of today, and I'll see you at the next events at the UAC. Thank you, everybody.